Hi everyone, welcome to Nareen's Life with MS. I am Nareen and it's time for another Friday Findings. I honestly think that not only is Friday my favorite thing, but I think Friday Findings is also my favorite thing to film because there it's always interesting to see what is new in the field of MS, and that too on a weekly basis because sometimes there are um, stories that are developing on each front of this disease, in terms of research, in terms of treatment, in terms of everything else. And so as a result, I have two stories this week as well, which cover different parts of the disease, mostly dealing with the diagnosis of MS. So to get started, start off with the first one, which of course is definitely a little more important because it is a new way of diagnosing MS, and not only that, it is a much faster way of diagnosing MS. Now, if you remember my story, I was diagnosed with MS in 2009, after actually going to an ophthalmologist, because I wasn't able to read out of my right eye. And then after getting a few tests done, the ophthalmologist actually recommended that I get an MRI done, and the MRI kind of showed that there were lesions in my brain and spinal cord. And that was when I was pretty much diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Considering that was back in June of 2009, you can almost imagine that in the 16 and a half years that have passed, there are of course new things, and there is a huge new thing that is starting now, which we are actually going to discuss. So what have scientists discovered? And this has actually happened because of a very large study done by uh, a university in the United States, focusing on multiple sclerosis and actually looking at how to do diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And they found out that using MRI, they actually view something besides what normal MRIs show, which is the white matter or the fatty tissue in the brain or the spinal cord becoming smaller or thinner, or having little lesions on it. Rather than that, they are looking at something else, which is called the paramagnetic rim lesions. Now these paramagnetic rim lesions, or PRLs, are more of a recent addition to MRI scans. And essentially what they end up doing is they make it a lot easier to not only diagnose MS, but it will also make it a lot easier to it'll be a lot faster to diagnose MS, because you are not looking for small lesions and having to wait for those lesions to grow to be able to actually be able to diagnose it. Now as a person who was diagnosed fairly early on in my disease, I would still say that it took me about a year. But even then, a lot of times what ends up happening is when you are diagnosed with the disease and you start treatment, a lot of times what ends up happening is whatever damage you've sustained already, there is no way of going back. So for a lot of the new patients that are going to have the ability to actually get diagnosed much faster, and do it just through getting an MRI done, it will be a lot easier. And I would say that, maybe it would be a faster process. Maybe it would also allow people to even have better lives, or even have, there being treatments that are already out there being a lot more effective as a result of, much earlier diagnosis for new patients with multiple sclerosis. So that is great. And knowing that, this new this this new finding is actually going to make waves across the world, especially considering that in a lot of places, people are not aware of this disease and usually would point to something else just because, it is MS is definitely a very rare disease. So, knowing that, there is going to be um, a good shot of a lot of people without actually experiencing too much deterioration in their body, in their spinal cord or their brain, actually getting very, very effective treatments from a very early time in their disease, does make life look a little brighter as a result. So that was one thing that I did want to share in regards to MS diagnosis, how the diagnosis is actually speeding up so that people are getting diagnosed a lot earlier than they were beforehand. So other one the other one that I do want to get to also considers MRI, MRIs. And it's funnily enough, it is something that is slightly different from the MRIs, slightly different in terms of the MRIs. So a lot of times when you are getting MRIs done, you do sometimes have to take an MRI where there is a dye that is injected in you, and then after that you do go into the MRI machine, get an MRI done. So now this dyeing agent, it uses a certain metal called gadolinium. And gadolinium, the important thing to know about gadolinium is the way it works is when you have the dye injected into your body, the gadolinium does end up creating the spectrum. So there is the ability to actually view MRIs as 3D almost, um, to be able to gauge the the extent of the disease. Now the good thing about this the second story is that researchers have actually found a way to create the dyeing agent, right? And dyeing as DYEING, the dyeing agent, which actually uses a lot less gadolinium than it normally would, right? One of the big things about gadolinium is that it has the ability to be fairly toxic. So a lot of times, if there are people that have to take a lot of MRIs, that where they do need to get that spectrum, they do need to have the dye injected into them. Now there is a new agent that uses about a quarter of the gadolinium, and that will make it a lot easier for for people who are minors or younger than the age of 18 to actually uh, you know do all of these MRIs. And that of course makes it easier because you have the ability to actually see them a lot earlier, right? You have the ability to pretty much conduct these tests that is much safer and at a much earlier age. So with both of these stories, I mean, the great thing is that, you have the ability to really diagnose people much earlier in their disease and much earlier in their, you know, um, in their journey of this disease. And not only that, but you can actually use dyeing agents even for people who are actually younger than 18, right? Because it is definitely safer not only for adults but also for children and minors. And that also becomes great because I think the one time I used the dyeing agent for an MRI, I think I was maybe 16, maybe 17. But knowing that, there was the ability that I could have been, I could have been diagnosed earlier on, and that, obviously that would have pretty much arrested the development of this disease for, the many number of years that it developed, just because of the much more powerful treatments that are available. It is just great to see that there are some huge things happening, not only in terms of the treatments and how MS is pretty much being viewed, but more in terms of getting it at all levels, right? From diagnosis to treatment, everything is being covered in the field of MS. So with that said, I hope you find this news very exciting. I definitely do, because this is pretty much protecting not only um, you know newer patients of this disease, but it's also making it a lot easier for them, a lot faster for them to pretty much get the help that they actually need. And with that said, I think this was a great Friday findings episode that I had the honor of sharing with you. And of course, as you know, the news articles that I read, I will link them in the description of this video so that you can see them. And of course, do share your inputs, do share your insights, do share your thoughts. And of course, even if you had the experience of you know using that dyeing agent or the previous dyeing agent to get the high contrast MRIs, do share that, because it's a little different from a regular MRI. So do share all of that. And with that being said, I hope you are all excited for the weekend. I hope your weekend goes very well. And with that said, this is Nareen's Life with MS. I am Nareen, and here's wishing you a good night. Bye.